Okay. Okay, perfect. So let's start slowly. Now I see that we have people have joined the discussion. So let's start actually with the webinar today. So the webinar about company strategies and what transformations compatible with carbon neutrality are required to decarbonize freight transport. So this webinar is co-organized by IDRI, the Institute for Sustainable Development and International Relations, our partner, the SLOCAT Partnership for Sustainable Low Carbon Transport, and the Michelin Group. This is organized in the framework of the second UN Global Transport Conference that is currently happening in China. And the agenda for the discussion today is the following one. So we will start actually presenting you some of the lessons that we have learned, Mark and myself, or SLOCAT and IDRI, together during a work this year with the business community. So, and we will present you how sectoral conversations can help business contribute to zero emission freight transport. And after that, we will open for a panel discussion with Esther, Director at the Smart Freight Center and Director of the Sustainable Freight Buyers Alliance. Pierre Martin, Senior Vice President Global Supply Chain at Michelin. And Yann de Ferrodi that will join us soon, that is Deputy Managing Direction, Operations and IT at the Groupe Rocher. And of course, conclude together on how to take this discussion forward in the next activities of the community we are working with. So I propose to directly jump into the first part of the agenda today, and pass you the floor, Mark, for this first part. Thanks.
Good afternoon. Welcome on behalf of the SLOCAT Sustainable Low Carbon Transport Partnership. It's a pleasure for us to be with you today and introduce this work that we've been doing together with IDRI. Both IDRI and SLOCAT are deeply involved in the global climate policy discussion. And what we see is that transport emissions are the second fastest growing source of emissions, and they're predicted to double or triple in the next 30 years unless action is taken. So if we're going to achieve the objectives of the Paris Agreement, action on transport emissions is essential. And we see that the discussion is very much dominated by passenger transport and also the transport supply industry. So we were really delighted to have the chance, with the support of Michelin, to contribute to this community of interest, to lead this community of interest on freight transport. And so we started this work this year and started these interviews and discussions with companies. And these are the cargo owners, the cargo controllers. These are the people who in many ways are the clients of the freight transport industry. So it's extremely illuminating to have these discussions. And it's this initial work that we're doing that we're going to be presenting to you today, our initial findings. And at the end, we'll explain a little bit about how we're going to carry on with this work in the future. Next slide, please. So, as I say, we need to address emissions to achieve the objectives of the Paris Agreement. And this requires systemic transformations in industrial systems. This is not just about ensuring that you ask for, a low carbon vehicle. Actually, this requires changes in the way material flows work, the way logistics systems work, the way projects are processed, and changes in business models. So it really requires these systemic transitions. And the recent IPCC report confirms that these kind of fundamental and profound transformations are necessary to stabilize the climate. And so what is clear is that these cargo owners, controllers, are key actors in this process. They're deciding where their products are sourced from, how they process them, where they process in how many steps, etc. And so this is corporations that are responsible for these processes are key actors in this process. So from the initial discussions we've had, we can already see at least 3 dimensions which we need to work on. The first is, really thinking about their process and business models. There's a number of pressures on corporations at the moment. One of them is resilience. This is encouraging companies to have shorter, maybe supply chains, more diverse supply chains. And also we see companies really thinking about how they provide goods and services. We see these trends where, you're now able to purchase condensed refills for products, so they're not shipping so much kind of water, but they're shipping condensed products. We see people now selling you water filters rather than selling you bottled waters. So we see that things are really starting to move and business models are being transformed. Yeah, this whole move towards local economy, more recycling, reuse of goods and waste is another important trend. And this is an opportunity to shorten supply chains and relocate processing facilities closer to customers, closer to suppliers, and closest to the raw materials. We heard about one company who was looking at how they will be able to extract raw materials from demolished buildings to be able to recycle them in their construction projects instead of sourcing raw materials from quarries and virgin land a long way away. So really interesting discussions about changing sources of materials. Clearly, the third element is actually changing the way the logistics system is organized, maybe moving to larger flows, so consolidating flows, having less frequent but larger deliveries, and thinking about the whole logistics chain, the number of times things are moved, which modes they're moved by, etc. And this is another dimension. So the third conclusion that we kind of come to is that actually these transformations are quite profound and require broad conversations across companies and between the transport supply and demand sector, as well as with climate policymakers. We see that the public policy environment is changing quite fast. This is going to change the context which corporations function in. For example, in the EU, road transport is proposed to be included in the emissions trading system. This is going to change the price of road transport. So there's a number of factors that are going to influence this, but this requires a new type of conversations within companies, with the climate community, and between cargo owners, controllers, and the transport supply industry. And we're looking forward to. So I now pass back to Jan, who's going to give a little bit more insights into how we've come to these initial key conclusions.
Thank you, Mark. And actually, I will go through quite quickly because I will try to be complementary to all the elements you provided already, and I think are quite helpful to structure the conversation. So I will take the message one by one and try to explain you what is behind and how we came to this point. This first one, I will go quickly through it because you mentioned most of the main elements. The starting point is the IPCC report, the special report on 1.5, that states clearly that carbon neutrality by mid-century implies deep emission reduction in all sectors, unprecedented, rapid, and far-reaching systemic transitions. If we look at the freight sector, especially as you explained, clearly the technological innovation will not be sufficient. And this is also some of the statement of the IPCC report, of this report, that a larger spectrum of mitigation action are required. So reaching zero emission freight transport is needed for carbon neutrality. Reaching it requires to go beyond vehicle and fuel shift and transforming this profound system and existing production and consumption system to reduce, as you said, good deliveries, shorten supply chain, facilitate modal shift, and other logistics optimization. Clearly, companies have key levers in hand regarding the freight characteristics, regarding the supply chain organization, regarding the characteristic or how they define the transport service levels. And this is how we came to this statement saying that the Paris Agreement implies reaching carbon neutrality, which implies reaching zero emission freight, which implies systemic transformation, and in this example of freight, which implies really the private sector involvement. On the first transformation, so as you explained, these are just first insight from the conversation we have been able to build with different cargo owners and controller and shippers. Just explaining this first point on revising existing industrial processes and business model. Clearly, the fact that we will now integrate more and more the environmental and climate impact, and that we will target to reach the goal of carbon neutrality, will make move the system from, let's say, the reality of overconsumption of materials today and business strategy to sell more with, for example, unnecessary product diversification or planning obsolescence, which in the end, create unnecessary transport demand, to an industrial system that will actually depend on less material consumption and have a lower environmental footprint of the different products, and in the end require less freight movements. So in that, the role of companies, here are a few bullets that could be to develop smaller, lighter products and packaging, that develop more reusable, recyclable, repairable products and packaging, replace the use of fossil-based with biosourced materials, and also develop other services or new services that will serve this economy towards, the reuse, repairability, and recyclability of their products. And clearly, the systemic effect that we have here, of course, on the industrial system and on the freight transport system. So reduction of energy and materials during the initial phase of production. Also, the number of products and packaging manufactured in the medium to long term as the lifespan will increase. And clearly, all these materials that will not be consumed, all this space or weight saved in the vehicle will reduce the need for deliveries and therefore the energy consumption, emission, and cost that are related. The second one on relocating industrial facilities and suppliers closer to customers is also this to recognize also that we are moving again from, let's say, an international competition on social and environmental norms that actually trigger on target to lower the production costs and created very long and complex supply chains and, of course, unnecessary kilometers traveled by goods, to a system that is more resilient and socially responsible in terms of supply chain, organized around local and regional production consumption hubs. So shortening distances and supply chains. And the role of companies in implementing or contributing to these transformations are the following one. This requires to revisit the different steps of process and consider localizing differently their facilities depending on the market location and the customers. As you said just before, sourcing the raw material and recycled materials closer to this processing site and changing suppliers if necessary, but also working with local materials and choosing different materials to, and therefore align afterwards the industrial processes and business models to this. So these systemic effects around these main transformations are, of course, first on the supply chain resilience and benefit for regional economies and acceptability regarding the customers, but also shortening the supply chains, of course, help to reduce this unnecessary kilometer and related freight traffic. So, and this is the direct effect, but other effect that we can also identify and foresee is that this localizing supply chain in regional hubs also help reduce dependency on some specific transport modes that are complex to decarbonize, like maritime and aviation, which may be more expensive to decarbonize in the future and still entails many technological uncertainties. So this systemic transformation could have this impact and also help facilitate the use of terrestrial modes of transport and therefore the electrifications. The third element is on changing logistic organization and lowering transport service level. Clearly, what we have seen in the past and the future is that trend is that we need to move from this just-in-time logistic organization that has reduced stock and internal logistic costs, but increase actually the service levels for transport deliveries, which created smaller, faster, and more flexible deliveries, but also reduced the size of shipment, increased the delivery frequency, and therefore the number of these smaller deliveries created reduced efficiency. We need to move from this model to a logistic organization where all energy and emission efficiency measure will be incentivized. This will be the reality in the carbon neutral world. And that requires more efficient use of mass transport modes and an increased efficiency in vehicle capacity. So clearly companies in this transformation, we identify that two main type of action or roles, one on revising stock management strategy and product availability, and the second one on revising their relationship with customers to discuss indeed how they could slow down or reduce the number of deliveries to consolidate flows. So These are, again, the systemic effects related to this. First is facilitate the collaboration among players and the consolidation of flows. And finally, on the transport sector, the logistic and transport service provider could therefore offer new options to decarbonize freight transport and look at modal shift towards rail or intermodal service, or try to better improve the vehicle capacity with the load factor, reduce empty running, and all these other action. And I will just finish with this slide, which is probably the most important one to conclude on why all this conversation and why all these elements. Clearly, as Mark explained, by talking with companies about this systemic transformation, we recognize clearly that not all levers were in the hand of the companies, and that it really requires the involvement of companies, but also other actors that could set the right environment, the right incentives, but also constraints to enable this transformation. So currently, the conversation we had with the private sector revealed that companies with this industrial process and important upstream and downstream freight movement could play a major role in the identification of barriers and solutions to reduce this movement, shorten the supply chain and facilitate modal shift, but that we needed actually to create the sectoral conversation that bring those companies with public authorities and customers in order to advance and create a good synergy and discuss how we could move from, let's say, how we could move these barriers or these challenges that the companies have identified, and actually create the good cooperation sphere in order to enable to move forward. So clearly, two proposals to try to move forward on this for us would be first that indeed we focus on this specific transformation, or we can start with this specific transformation and discussing a bit with the companies, expressing what are the barriers, what are the conditions under which they could accelerate action. And in a second step, having all actors discussing their role in the transition and the implementation, and trying to design the right policy solution to achieve these mitigation options. So that's the end of this first part. I'm sorry if it's a bit heavy. I hope that I have not lost too many people, and because it was a bit rushy and we run a bit with Mark, but to provide you this broad picture. And actually, before to start the conversation with the rest of the panel, so the idea of the conversation right now would be actually to take a bit. So we have provided this example, and we have the opportunity to have two companies, I mean Michelin and Groupe Rocher, that have participated to the conversation with us and enable us also to develop this narrative and this insight. So we will of course be happy to hear you on this. We have also Esther, that we are really glad to have on board, because as you know, maybe I know for the audience, but the Smart Freight Center, and you will probably, I will let you introduce it, Esther, but is really involved on the decarbonization of the freight transport sector. And we are really happy that you are there, and that you could also, I'm sure, introduce a bit what is the Sustainable Freight Buyers Alliance, and I'm sure that you will have a lot of question and interest related to this new initiative. And I suggest, so just to start by asking you a first round of questions to all of you. And just to mention it to the audience, if you want to ask a question, there is a Q&A space normally in Zoom. So do not hesitate to ask your question directly during the panel. And I mean, the speakers could reply to you either afterwards or where they are not speaking. So please do not hesitate to ask your question directly in the chat. So now I will ask you, actually start with you, Pierre Martin and Yann. I would like to ask you if you could give us some example from your own experience on implementing the transformation we have presented. And I would be glad that you could indeed explain it, what it means concretely for your business, and yeah, give us some concrete stuff from your experience. So I don't know who wants to start, Pierre Martin or Yann. You are free to decide.
whatever.
Right, Jan.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I have some practical examples of doing this with our the type of products that are cosmetic products, where we produce and distribute a lot of bottles and cosmetic shampoos and shower gel, etc., all in a liquid form and in plastic bottles. The first step was that we would typically buy the bottles from suppliers, transport the bottles, so transporting a lot of air, and delivering those bottles to the plants where they would be filled with the product. We were on a path to get rid of plastic, and finally we said to ourselves, well, plastic is there for a moment, so we are going to try to save on carbon emissions in the first place and change a bit of the trick. So we decided to invest in machines to blow our own bottles at the plant so that they could be filled right after that. And in doing so, we saved, transportation, because instead of transporting, empty bottles, we would typically, transport plastic objects the size of a finger that would then heat and blow to produce the bottles. So this saved the equivalent of I think 2,700 tons of carbon emissions, because we've saved a lot of trucks on the road, and then we have produced those bottles directly. Then came another improvement where we changed from PET to PET recycled. So now all of our bottles are produced using recycled PET, and they are of course recyclable as well, which saves tons of plastics. But then in the end of the day, we said, well, the best plastic is the one you don't use, right? So, and you don't use also all the fossil energy to produce it, etc. So we said, well, we're going to introduce, solid shampoos and solid shower gel. So solid shower products, in fact. Or reintroduced, for a matter of fact, but the new thing was the solid shampoo, and this we did by changing the products, and instead of having plastic packaging, we have reusable carton boxes and corrugated. So that's very basic, but that saves also a lot of water and so on and so on. So and again, we save another 30 tons of plastic in doing this. So that's huge, and that's a change in phase. Taking into account the end game and being serious that you cannot do instant revolution. You have to admit that consumers have to change their habits, because that's a hell of a change. And also we need to reconfigure the manufacturing footprint and the manufacturing investment so as to be able to move from basically filling bottles to producing bottles down to not having bottles at all.
Thanks, Jan. That's for this great example and illustration. And Pierre Martin, I see you want indirectly to react, so please follow.
Tana, I love the example of Jan, and I'm happy to bring you from the world of cosmetics to the world a bit more down to earth of tires. But we have similar challenges and actually sometimes similar solutions. So one example that comes to my mind is the packaging of the motorcycle tires that we sell in Asia. So you have to know that Asia is the top world market in terms of motorcycle tires. And the market practice there is to sell those tires with a very fancy, shiny wrapping that has no use, but it's supposed to be appealing to the customers. And what we've decided earlier this year in Indonesia, which is one of the top markets, is to stop wrapping our tires. So we eradicated the packaging of those tires. And it's helped saving a lot of waste, lots of energy, and more than 300 tons of plastics each year. So I think it's quite a similar move where you need to transform the market and educate the customer as well. The second example I'd like to give you is more on the service offer side, how we can promote service offers that are less impactful in terms of carbon footprint. And there we're working on two levels that you mentioned in your presentation, Jan. The first one is how to better organize logistics to deliver full truck loads to customers. So we have a dedicated service offer that promote this full truck or full container load service. And that is there to reduce the number of empty trucks that are driving every day on our roads. And the second service offer that is pushing the weekly delivery versus the daily delivery, which is more the market practice. And by doing that, obviously, we're able to better optimize the delivery routes and to emit less CO2. So we're working both on the business offer side and the service offer side.
Oh, very interesting, and that means just to ask you a clarification, Pierre Martin. I mean, on this last example, this means that clearly you ask your client to revise also their, let's say, their expectation, or to change a bit their expectation in terms of deliveries, and that you see, I mean, this is starting to happen, and that, I mean, you can create this discussion with them, and it's not the majority maybe yet, but this is a trend that is starting. So that's what I understand.
Yeah, definitely. And what matters there, because first when we introduced the idea, we got a lot of resistance from the internal teams and especially the marketing and sales teams. What we realized is that when we brought to the table some customers and we shared with them the stakes linked to these service offers, how much CO2 we could save, how much cost we could save as well, the discussion was very constructive. And actually the customers understand that, yes, maybe for 10% of the volumes, they need to have daily deliveries or express deliveries, but for 90% of the volumes, they don't need that type of delivery. So I think the engaging the customers into this thought process is very key to be successful.
Thanks a lot, Pierre Martin. And I will ask now a question to you, Esther. Actually, you are. So first, I will ask you to introduce you, of course, and the Smart Freight Center. I know, and I think maybe I would like to ask you to react. You have seen in the business transformation we have mentioned and addressed in this paper are mostly focusing on, let's say, the transformation of the structure of the demand and its organization. I know that you are used to I mean, with the approach, the avoid, shift, improve approach, and you know, demand side versus supply side. So I would be glad also if you can share with us how you see this perspective and the role of each side, let's say, of the transformation, so the demand and the supply, and and maybe how you see the role of shippers in the transition, related also to your new stream of activity and the new initiative.
Okay, yeah. Now I will cover all of them. Let's say take them one by one. So first of all, indeed, I'm representing Smart Freight Center. It's a global NGO to decarbonize freight and helping the industry to do so via different guidances and bringing the industry together, basically. And bringing the industry together means we have, first of all, established the Global Logistic Emission Council. And the council is basically a voluntary partnership of a lot of companies, including shippers, carriers, and logistics service providers, but also a lot of experts from the academy, and also existing initiatives and the tools in freight decarbonization environment. So what we have done there, first of all, is to make sure that we know what we are talking about, to have a number on these emissions we are talking about, because without knowing the numbers, you cannot really manage them well, right? So that's why we have established the GLAC framework, which is focusing on is now becoming a global standard, and in its way to become also an ISO standard. To make sure that the industry is calculating in an aligned way the supply chain emissions from freight, and it is make sure that also that is being used from all partners and players of the logistics supply chain, but of course hopefully also as a way to input on the target setting, right? So we very much like to see also having national governments and other non-commercial parties also to use the GLAC framework, just to make it more simple. Thank you. There is a link sent in the chat for the GLAC framework. So that was one thing. And what we have seen, and I've been with Smart Freight Center for 6 years almost, and that's when we started with the GLAC. And at the beginning, the conversation was very different, and we hadn't seen much more logistics service providers and carriers being involved. And only some leading companies were really concerned about this topic, companies in terms of shippers. And there were really just a handful of companies which were really wanted to have this global standard and have wanted to move it forward and have it basically produced as soon as possible. And as the discussion continued, this group find it really important to stay together and recognized the ability of creating tools and different guidances for the industry, by the industry, works much better. So we started to create different projects, and now basically a couple of years down the line, we are indeed starting the Sustainable Freight Buyers Alliance, where we have already involved others as well. So it's not just an SFC initiative, but we're working together with BSR and BEF for the World Economic Forum. And both these organizations have really relevant green freight related action groups and programs. And basically the members of theirs and the members of ours, where there's already a big overlap, decided that we have to work together better and basically have to create a platform where we can also bring in other initiatives which are in this landscape to make sure that the companies are supported and help, like, what do I have to do now, right? Because it is a very complicated topic to handle by shippers, right? Which don't necessarily have the expert internally, and they just find a lot of ongoing initiatives out there. So structuring, what's out there was one of the first important starting point of creating the Buyers Alliance. And there are a couple of other things as well. So, but what the Sustainable Freight Buyers Alliance would like to achieve is really to unite the freight buyers and also the freight initiatives to decarbonize freight in more accelerated way. And what we're going to do with these groups is basically three things, three work streams we are bringing together. One of them is really to look into the solutions. The second one is to create really collaborations, and the third one to, again, using the GLAC framework to assess really not just the missions of the companies, but also the missions of the different initiatives and different collaboration activities to make sure that we really focus on the big ticket numbers here in terms of collaboration. And I think the companies we are involving now are getting really excited to have this tool in hands, which will not just be anymore, a group of leading companies like the GLAC, where we really bring together the experts, but to have a platform for those companies as well, which are really starting just this journey, but they have also a very huge environmental footprint for the logistics activities. So in that sense, we want to bring them in, give them also solutions, and give them also the chance immediately to enable meaningful collaborations. I hope what I think I'm forgetting about the demand and the supply angle. What you have been saying is, of course, there is the indeed those three elements. You can bring it also into 5, right? So the avoid ships improve, but basically the avoid is really where the shipper has a very important role, right? That they are structuring sourcing and supply chain better, much closer than actually the LSPs who are more in the improve and the shift element. They can have a role. But what we see is that the collaboration between the shippers and the LSPs is really getting deeper and deeper. So there are procurement tools, what GLAC has also produced, but also the Clean Cargo Working Group, which really enables this collaboration between shippers and carriers. So they can eventually, the shippers can eventually have also more influence and support towards how carriers can shift and improve as well. And one concrete example I would like to bring out where is the insetting. It's a carbon insetting in the transport sector, which is a new concept what SFC has put forward, I think over more than a year ago now. And that is now going to become also a project to work out the details of these methodologies, because many of us heard about the book and claim system, right? As the shippers can ask the logistics service providers to use biofuels, aviation, the sustainable aviation fuels we all hear about, but also across all modes of transport. But the risk is there, is that you're paying for it, but eventually how is the emission being calculated, and how is it, who is going to write it on their books? So we really need an alignment here, and again, a methodology and the framework which is used in an aligned way to make sure that these fuels can be used in much broader scale, but this can go on to other solutions as well. So actually companies should not look into offsetting as long as they can support their own logistics supply chains to be decarbonized. And insetting could be a tool which they can give to their carriers and LSPs to make sure that their own supply chains are getting greener, becoming greener. So basically, this is a financial tool which can be indirectly provided this way. So that's one element one example where you can see that the shipper, besides the avoid, can go into the improve area as well as a direct support.
And very importantly, I think on this topic, it's also something we have mentioned in previous report on ambition for the role of companies, that clearly looking at offsetting should be done after having done all the structural transformation that could be done in the end. And as Pierre Martin and Jan were explaining, and indeed, I think it's important to look at this question. And I know that, for example, at Rocher Group, there is a very interesting approach also about how to look at offsetting differently from emission reduction. And I remember this conversation we had the opportunity to have, Jan, and that I found very insightful. I don't want to open this question right now. I have another round of questions, but let's keep this one maybe for the end, because it's a really relevant one. I wanted maybe to continue a bit the conversation on and having this example, understanding also what could be done. You started a bit, Pierre Martin, to highlight some internal resistance when you mentioned. So I wanted, the second round of question for me was around actually what do we need to unlock or accelerate this business transformation that we have mentioned, and making them like real at scale. So I would be glad that you could maybe Pierre Martin and Jan first within your company explain us a bit how you have seen on these different or on the different example you gave us, the internal resistance or enablers, also what you have identified as enablers that have helped to advance on this transformation. So maybe you can just share with us some element about this resistance and enablers internally to the company. Pierre Martin, please, you can start.
Sure. So on the internal resistances, I just mentioned a few, and I think they are kind of obvious, and I would say natural, especially when you change the business offer, when you change the service offer. There's a reluctance that it will be accepted by the market, and we're in a very competitive world, so there's always this challenge, and I would say this internal resistance is obvious. With marketing and sales, it can be as well with quality when you totally change the way you deliver the product or you manufacture the product. but I like to insist more on the enablers. And I'd say that the first enabler for me in the organization is really the full support of the top management. And when you look at the Michelin Group, we have had from day one a very clear and loud message from our CEO that we want to become an all-sustainable company, and that everything we do at Michelin needs to become sustainable, and that translates into the different initiatives we drive and the support and the objectives we share across the company. And I think it's a transformation, so it's not an overnight transformation, but through concrete examples. If you take the example of logistics, the day you demonstrate to your teams that you're ready to pay more for more carbon-friendly or carbon-free solution, then it really makes the mindset change, and the teams starting to believe what you say. And I think this company, this mindset, this culture transformation is really the foundation of the change, and it has to start with the top.
Thank you for this. And Jan, would you like to complement and add a different aspect?
I think that Pierre Martin is very right in saying that it comes from the top. You know, I work in a family company, so it's family owned, and our president is the third generation, and the family is very much geared to sustainable development, planting trees and respecting nature from the very start, because the founder, really had an experience in nature very young, and discovered that nature was beneficial to his own health, and then discovered that he could make products out of natural components that he would then sell, on markets, and then through mail order, but since it's in our DNA, it's very strong, because we were one of the first companies in France to become a mission company, and the mission is reconnect people to nature. So again, it says that nature is really at the heart of what we do, and that's also an element to push people to respect nature, and we're very serious about being low carbon and really drive our operations and the choices we do in that way. Now the resistance are, of course, as in any big project and big pictures, the devil is in the detail, and the way people react. So you have also to measure people versus what they have to do. So tell me how I'm measured, and I will tell you how I will behave. And that's probably one of the lessons we're learning, because we know that the optimum that we're reaching is not in the end the sum of all the optimums and the local optimums that we can find. And we have one example for that, or I will give you two examples. One is following the story of the change in the product. In between, the president had an idea that we should sell bulk in our stores. So to offer our customers to come and refill the bottle at the various selling points and stores we have. Of course, we started the test right in the beginning of COVID, so we don't have the right elements in any case. But the resistance came from the field, saying, the machine takes too much space. And one of the KPI in retail is, what is the turnover that you do per square meter or square foot, whatever. But in the end of the day, the product has to pay for its space. And we had an issue, very simple, that because the customers will not change their habit fast enough, let's say overnight, then the machine would not pay for the space. So that was the main resistance, right? So I'm sure we will come back one way or another, but at the moment that's a very strong resistance from the selling field. Another one is when we restructure, and when we want to restructure for the good, like we recently conducted a survey of our 40-odd warehouses in the world, and we discovered that there was one area where in Northern America where the businesses had considerably grown in the western part, and the warehouse was in the east, right? So to better serve the customer, we ship by air the product so that they get delivered in a short time possible, right? Now, if we introduce a new warehouse, that's great, because of course we will do land transportation as opposed to air freight. Okay, so we will reduce the carbon footprint considerably for that part of the world for our activities, and so and also reduce some of the costs. So because of course it's a trailer is less expensive than any freight by air you can find. So that was very win-win. Unfortunately, when you come and you knock on the door of the guys operating in the east, you're going to take business from them, and they say, well, it will absorb less fixed costs in my warehouse. It's no good for me, blah blah blah. And of course, then you can see that globally the company will save. Globally, the company will be better off in terms of carbon emission. And yes, this guy in this warehouse will be at a loss, but largely compensated by the rest of the benefits. So yes, we have eventually to escalate it and say, okay, no, that's group interest here. Sorry, and that's also from a management standpoint. It has to be also strong and resilient in the way we want to conduct the change and transformation.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I think it's good to insist on this. Of course, I mean, this transformation will require some social transitions, and this will not be, I mean, and there are, I mean, the last one you're explaining is relevant and critical to be able to anticipate. And also this is maybe the good transition with the latest the last following question that I will ask to all of you, because it's about the external stakeholders. And indeed, actually, what is the role of the others in supporting you in the transformation? And I just see this, for example, this social transition that you or the social issue that you could create in reorganizing the supply chain is something that indeed needs to be discussed and dealt also with the public authorities in a way that could, for example, help you, I don't know, to have or to find other opportunities for the let's say the other companies locally. So what I'm just mentioning, I think it's a good transition. This type of issues, for example, that is not only just depending on you and what you can do with your company, but depending on let's say the society and what the different stakeholders can do. So I would like to ask you, from when we started a bit to mention the customers and a bit the other stakeholders, but maybe we can collectively, or you can develop a bit on other example, how you see the role of the public authorities or the customers, and how you see them useful or not in the transformation, or what do you expect from them in order to accelerate your transformation. And I would start maybe with Esther in order to change a bit, and also if you can tell us from your experience and discussion with the other companies, how you see this topic of actually, let's say, the role of the external stakeholders in helping the companies to transform.
It's a very good question, and it's a very important one as well. So, of course, policymakers, I think, are here by far the most influential, and as they can make those decisions which can make a real incentive here for the change, right? So, price on carbon to start with, right, as a real incentive. But for example, what we are trying to do at we will be doing also the Sustainable Freight Buyers Alliance is to see if what are the policy asks that companies in a joint manner can stand up behind, you know, to have really the industry showing exact elements of policy making where you know there is changes needed, and again to show it with numbers, right, to show it with really numbers of what that change could bring about in different places. I think that element is so very important to as really the company representatives on this call said as well, is that as when you show, you know, what this means in terms of numbers, that is already a very good way to win the stakeholders, I think. In my opinion, there is also a very important role for the customers themselves as well. You know, like the custom that we used to, as all of us, we order something on the internet one night, and the day after we would like to receive it immediately. And of course, shipping is free. Now we all know that shipping is not free. So they have to get this into the minds of people. And that is one element where, of course, the companies play an important role, but none of them really wants to start with it, you know? So here, I think there is a sectoral element, you know, if there are two competing apparel companies, and Smart Fashion Center, we have been participating in the UN's fashion charter. It is something that, you know, that the companies are really reluctant to do. You know, I want to serve my customers to the max, so I don't want to limit its comfort of receiving the goods next day. So unless I can do it as an industry, they are really reluctant to do it alone. So that's one element why we find that sectoral engagement and sectoral commitments are very important here. So that's the element, I think, which I wanted to highlight. That's also important to that transformational change.
Thanks a lot, Esther, and Pierre Martin, please continue.
Yeah, sure. Frankly, I totally support what Esther just said. I think there are two critical roles that we expect as private sector from the public authorities and the policymakers. The first one is a combined role in promoting the awareness to the people on what is at stake, making visible those stakes. And again, if you take the example of Esther, when you order on the internet, if you order 1 hour delivery or 1 week delivery, you don't see the difference. You don't see what is at stake. And here, I think the public authorities and the policymakers can promote this visibility on what is at stake. And then, definitely, we need to play by the same rules. So we need to have a common frame on the carbon price, the regulation, so that we can survive in our industry that are, again, very competitive. And if you take the automotive industry, the tire industry, we are very willing to move. As Michelin Group, we are, I would say, a leader in this transformation. But if the rules of the game don't change, we'll not be able to survive because it's a very competitive market. So the same rules need to apply to everyone. And we need to move towards carbon taxation, towards regulations that are forcing everyone in the industry to move at the right pace.
Thank you. I don't know, Jan, if you have other elements to add. I mean, many have been said already, but please.
I do. I think that the French authorities, for example, did an interesting move over the summer. Is that they forged a declaration for the e-commerce companies to obey by certain charters, and some volunteered to sign. And that was interesting because in those they would say, you know, there is no such thing as free delivery. So you should not advertise on your e-commerce sites free delivery. You can offer the delivery, but delivery has a cost. And we know that the cost in money of, within 2 hours delivery, like some big companies are doing, has a cost, but has also, which is not passed on to the customer at full-fledged. So it's clear. So they are a bit losing on that side. And also it's very expensive in terms of carbon emission. Now, today, what we see is due to what's happening with the price of gas and across Europe and so on, we see carbon cost going through the roof, literally, which is disturbing, creates some problems because it's very violent. But at the same time, I remember a conversation that we had within Supply Chain for Good at Moving On with Florent Ménégo, where he said, if you don't fix the price of a carbon ton at 100 euro, nothing changes. Nothing changes because it's not expensive enough. And I did the exercise myself. Okay, I'm going to change things in my spreadsheet in my different project investment. And indeed, sensitivity is very clear that when it moves beyond 100, which it will eventually, then some projects have to change, and you see things completely differently. Now, the question was also, what do you do with, what do you need from external bodies and so on? When we are, in transportation, for example, and even in warehousing or manufacturing, we have huge investments. And even small transporters, they don't buy a truck for the next couple of weeks, right? They do that for 6 or 7 years. So if you want to really initiate and support transition, then I believe that we need to have some fiscal views and incentive to do so as to protect those relatively small companies that have difficulties to invest and help them to do so. Now, if we want to punish in the end those who will not have moved after 5 or 6 years, then fine. But to start with, we need to place incentives to make it easier. Because today, if we want, and we work heavily with Pierre Martin in our wonderful French Supply Chain Association around H2 vehicles and H2 trucks. We know that today, the refit, the H2 refit of a standard truck leads you to probably double the price of a current vehicle, right? So that's expensive for carriers. Okay, we aim together with France Supply Chain, with Supply Chain for Good, through an initiative to gather transporters and shipper, so that we could bring to the market about 150 vehicles and say, if we do that together, we can commit on 150 vehicles and try to find some help from the European Union, because we believe that this is the right way to do. We cannot do that alone. Company after company, it's sometimes too expensive, sometimes too risky regarding the type of competitive market they're in. But if we combine the needs, even from competitors, even from, let's say, communities of supply chain managers, then we can help change the world in that direction. But we will need some support from authorities.
Thank you, Jan, for this actually almost good conclusion in a way. But I will let Marc conclude the full meeting of today. But thank you for this last insightful reaction. And actually, yeah, I think we will not try, or I don't know, Marc, but I think we will not try to wrap up all the elements we had today. But I will just share the screen again and pass you the floor just for the conclusion on how to take this discussion forward. So please, Marc, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jan. And first of all, I should like to thank, on behalf of IDRI and SLOCAT, I'd like to thank Esther, Pierre Martin and Jan for their time to contribute to our work and be with us here today. I think it was a very, very kind of interesting discussion. Clearly, it's a discussion we're just starting to have. And I would like to thank them, particularly Michelin and Yves Rocher, for sharing so openly, like what you're doing and how it's working out for you. We've heard from Yves Rocher about how they're changing some of their processes, how they're delivering goods to customers. We heard from Michelin how they're changing and kind of about how they're packaging their goods and engaging with customers on those topics. So I think in this early stage of these transitions, talking about this and sharing so openly is really, really important. We only have 29 years to make these transformations. And yeah, we need to get onto it. We also heard from Esther how, I mean, there are frameworks, there are supporting systems in place for companies that want to go down this path. That's also very, very encouraging. I'm convinced on the last part was very interesting on the changing public policy context. I think the policy context is going to change pretty fast. And I'm convinced that the companies that are thinking about this early are getting ready and starting to move, are going to be really, really placed to be leaders in the low carbon economy that we will have in 2050. I think consumer expectations are changing really fast. That came up in the last part of the conversation as well. And also investor expectations are changing really fast. I mean, it's easy to kind of think that these things are slow. If you think back like to smoking, and there used to be smoking on planes, there used to be smoking in restaurants and bars, and now this is, you know, almost kind of unthinkable. So things do move fast. The last thing we wanted to say on the next slide, please, is to tell people a little bit how we're going to be going forward with this conversation. We're starting this work in this community of interest. It's going to go on. We will be presenting a paper showing our initial findings at the UNFCCC COP26 in Glasgow in the next couple of weeks, because this is an important part. IDRI and SLOCAT have a role to be feeding back into the public policy process what's happening, what's not happening, and why not. So these discussions and our work in the community, we will take back and there'll be more formal opportunities next year to us to feed back into the climate process. And that's an important part of this conversation, talking to the companies and then feeding back into the policy process. So this is just the start of this, and we will be carrying on with these discussions next year. You will have seen that we've been having a lot of the conversations with European or North American companies. They're global companies, but often based in Europe and North America. We'd be delighted, taking advantage of this Sustainable Transport Conference in China, to expand our group of countries to reach out more into Asia, but also Africa and Latin America. So anyone that's listening in who is interested in taking part in these conversations, please contact us. We'd be delighted to expand our group of companies to include you. Our emails are on the slide. And with that, I'd like to bring the session to a close. Remind you that we'll be posting on the Moving On website, on the IDRI website, our materials, our resources, as we develop more conclusions and papers that come out of our work. So thank you all for the time, and really looking forward to deepening and expanding this conversation in the months and years ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all, and have a good day and a good weekend.